dog over there with Luigi on his back. I want to see if I can get a photo of it. Alright, what's going on, you guys, man? Welcome back to yet another King Japes video. So we're back in the city today, and I have a very special topic planned out because we're going to be talking about sort of kind of like a hybrid technique that you can utilize in your street photography to elevate your photographs. And it's actually very, very simple. All it takes is two simple steps. The first one, knowing what the fishing technique is, and the second one, just having exposure compensation on your camera. Now today I am shooting with the Ricoh GR3, but pretty much any of the techniques and kind of things that we're going to be talking about today applies to both digital as well as film. So whatever camera you have, you are going to be covered, and we're going to try to break it down and show you guys out on the street how to utilize these two techniques together. So the two techniques that we're going to be talking about today is the fishing technique and highlight weighted metering. Now when used in conjunction, these two techniques can give off some really creative effects, especially if you were shooting in a city with a bunch of like skyscrapers and there's a lot of contrasty scenes. This is definitely something that you would want to utilize. You're going to be able to capture some really nice dramatic scenes, and if you are at the right place at the right time, it could be one of your most favorite street photographs. So this is just a way to elevate your street photography using both of these techniques. There's a dog over there with Luigi on his back. I want to see if I can get a photo of it. But something that really kind of slows me down and grounds me in terms of street photography is using the fishing technique. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but essentially the fishing technique is a way for you to set up your composition with your camera, and all you really have to do is wait for a subject to walk through the frame. It's a very simple technique, but it's also very, very useful. That was more run and gun, of course. Now check this out. Now to use the fishing technique, all you really need to do is find a scene that you find interesting. What I want you guys to do when using this technique is to find a nice contrasty scene. All that means is there's going to be a lot of highlight, like for example this advertisement right here, followed by some type of shadow. The shadow could be anything from a light pole, kind of like look down this way really fast here. It could be a light pole, it could be a shadow casted by, you know, this tall building here in front of us. But the idea is you want to have a nice contrasty scene so that when you do use your highlight weighted metering, it's going to draw out all of those shadows, become super dark, and really focus only on your highlights. So for example, now we're fishing, we're waiting here, we're in highlight weighted mode. And that was more so kind of just like an example, not really, you know, a true photograph, but you guys should get the idea from that. You set your camera up, you wait for these subjects to walk through the frame, and you use your highlight weighted metering to your advantage. What you need to do is take your exposure compensation, and you can do this with pretty much any camera. You're going to take your exposure compensation and you're going to knock it back up until those shadows become completely dark. All you want to see inside of this frame here is this exposed highlight zone. Now depending on the camera that you are using, there might be some features that allow you to shoot like this without having to adjust your exposure compensation. Like for example in the GR3, there's actually a highlight weighted metering mode, which is very, very beneficial. But if you're shooting with a Fuji, a Leica, a film camera for that matter, all you have to do is expose for your highlights. So just read for the highlights, overexpose that a little bit, and you should be set. You should be completely fine. So with that, let's go walk around now. Let's try to capture a couple of more scenes and really, you know, show you guys rather than talk about it. Let's go. All right, so one of the first things that I do when I get out here to the city is look for different patches of light. And what do I mean by that, guys? I mean when the sun is setting, maybe it's around 4 to 5 o'clock now that it's fall, and you know the skyscrapers are casting these dark shadows, and there's a ton of contrasty scenes. For example, like the one across the street here. We're gonna try to get a little zoom in on here. It's not too narrow here, but right across that street there is a nice kind of patch of light that I want to use the technique on. So we're gonna head over there, see if we can get any type of good photographs. Okay, so we got some geometry going on here in the background. All I'm doing again, you guys, is using my exposure compensation to basically only have the highlights metered properly. That's gonna completely dark out the shadows. We're gonna stay here and fish for a little bit, see if we can get a good photograph. So kind of as you're fishing and waiting for your subjects to walk through the frame, what you could do with your camera is kind of just play around with the angles. Try some vertically, try some horizontally, and just work the scene until you are satisfied with, the images that you get. Alright, so this is like a very busy intersection. We got Market Street kind of converging over to Kearney. And basically all of these tall buildings right now, especially with the time of day and where the positioning of the sun is, are creating these nice contrasty scenes. So look for things like that for your fishing technique, kind of just to start out. Over time, you're not going to always have to look for those things. Exposure compensation, -3. So right here. The best part is this is pretty low pressure. You're not sticking a camera in someone's face, and for the most part, it looks like you're just photographing the building or just, a scene in front of you. As long as you wait and have that patience, you can make a bunch of incredible photographs just by using this technique. Now, of course, what I'm showing you guys today is just one kind of way to do it. There's really no one way to kind of get the job done with, this type of stuff. So learn it, experiment with it a little bit, take into consideration all the things that we talk about today, but try to make it your own, because, this is something that anybody can do, but there's always ways to innovate with your photography. And as long as you kind of get these like basic fundamentals, you're going to be able to make some really insane images. For example, not all the time do you always have to use the fishing technique. To still use kind of like that exposure compensation to give yourself like a slide film look, you can do it on the move, as long as you can recognize where your highlights are going to be to still make your exposure nice and dramatic. So we're going to kind of walk through Market Street here, make some photographs, maybe do some fishing, but for the most part, it's going to be run and gun for a little bit. Got it. Let's revisit this area. Alright, you guys, so we're back home now, and I want to give you guys a couple of closing thoughts before we end this video, and just go over some of the things that I feel like I missed kind of out on the street. So First things first, number one, most of the time while I was out there, I was kind of giving like, examples of how you can use the fishing technique, plus kind of, exposing for the highlights and completely darken out the shadows. But one thing that I completely forgot to mention was that this particular style is just one way of doing it. Just because I do it this way doesn't mean that it always has to be, done exactly like this. This is just more of kind of like a guideline example of, something that I do on the streets. Mostly I was just trying to show it in the most bare bone way possible. And so that's why I referred to some of the scenes as, just patches of light. Secondly, in the episode, I was shooting mainly with the Ricoh GR3. And if you guys know about the GR3, it has kind of like a rear LCD display. Now I know that a majority of the people who watch this channel are film shooters. And so with that said, film shooters, we can also still achieve these images, but you have to keep in mind as well the type of film that you're using. So now because exposure with film is very tricky, you might need some practice and some trial and error to achieve the desired effect. It also, kind of depends on what film you're using. A lot of times this technique works great on slide film. That's just how it looks, and that's just how I've always been able to pull it off with film. But with that said, not all films are going to respond the same with, minus exposure compensation by underexposing it, essentially. So film shooters, try this at your own risk. And on that note, I want to end this off by just saying practice makes perfect. Anytime that you're out there with your camera is an opportunity to make a couple of photographs. Even if you're out running errands, if you're out, with your buddies or whatever you're doing, take a camera with you. Anytime you see the opportunity to make a photograph, make it. Because I guarantee you, some of the best photographs you'll ever make are going to be done unexpectedly when you're not expecting it. Someone's car alarm is going off. So with that said, I'll see you guys at the next one, man. Keep shooting, stay out there as always. Minolta Gang.